Hello and welcome to the second lesson in our overview and Excel setup module here. In this lesson, you're going to learn some of the key points that you need to factor in and set up properly in your version of Excel so that this works on your computer, on your laptop, or on your tablet. Now, if you're already an Excel expert and you already know quite a bit, you already have at least an intermediate level of proficiency, then maybe you can just skip this lesson. But I would encourage you to watch it briefly anyway, because chances are we're going to cover something here that you haven't thought of before, or that you haven't seen before, that you haven't really properly considered before. And we might even go over a few common problems that you have encountered that you don't know how to fix, and we'll explain how to fix them here. We're going to start by going over the instructions on the PC version of Excel, as you can tell from this PC instructions tab, and then we'll go over to the Mac instructions down here. Now, some of these PC instructions will actually apply even if you're using Excel on the Mac, but overall it's going to be fairly separated, and I'll indicate when what I'm saying actually applies to both versions of Excel. So first things first, a large part of what we do in this course is going to be covering Excel shortcuts. So if you look at a lot of other courses out there, they will say things like, okay, go to insert by using the mouse like I just did, and then go to insert, and then let's go over here to a chart, insert column chart, and pick the one we want. Now, you can do that if you want, but you're going to drive yourself crazy because you are using so many of these commands so frequently that if you are not using keyboard shortcuts, you are just going to spend a ridiculous amount of time on Excel. You're going to be pulling all-nighters, so you really need to learn keyboard shortcuts for the finance industry. Just take a look at this. Let's say I want to change the font color of all this text. Well, I could use the mouse. I could go up here to home, and then I can go over here to font color and then pick the one I want. Or I could just use the keyboard shortcut like I just did there, and look at how much faster that is. So you see the power of keyboard shortcuts. You're going to be using them all the time, and it's important to know how to enter them correctly. So there are two basic categories. There are shortcuts that start with the Alt key, and then shortcuts that start with the Control or Shift keys, or both of those together. So with the Alt key, the way you do it is if you have a shortcut like Alt-T-O to go to the options menu, we normally write that in the course as Alt plus T plus O. Now, the plus signs there don't literally mean that you enter the plus key on your keyboard. It just indicates that it's a combo of those keys. So in this case, how do you enter something like this? Well, first you press the Alt key on the keyboard. Now you can see that a bunch of numbers and letters here are highlighted at the top of the screen. If I press Alt here, I press Alt once and I release it. I press T once and I release it. And then I press O and release it. And then I get to this options menu. And the same applies for almost anything else. If we wanted to change the font colors, for example, I would press Alt, release it, and then the H key, and release that. And then for the font color, I would press F and then C and release both of those. And then I could pick the font color like I just did before. So bottom line is that with the Alt key shortcuts, you are pressing and releasing keys in sequence, and that is how we enter them. But when you have shortcuts with Control or Shift in front, it's a little bit different. A very simple example of this is Control B or Command B on the Mac. And by the way, the Alt-T-O shortcut on the Mac is Command and then the comma key. So for the Control plus B shortcut, this basically makes text bold, so Control B. Now the tricky part is that you do not press Control, release Control, and then press B. You actually have to press Control, hold it down, and then press B, and then you can release it, and it makes it bold. So these shortcut keys work differently, and you'll see many examples of this throughout the course. If we are trying to select a whole region of text with the Shift Control down arrow key, well, you don't just press Shift, release it, press Control, release it, and press the down arrow key. If you do that, you just go down one row. Instead, what you do is press Shift, hold it down, press Control, hold it down, and then press the down arrow key, and keep pressing it, and keep holding down the Shift and Control keys as you move down. So just be aware of this, because you will see shortcut combinations written the same way, always with that plus sign in front, but in reality they mean slightly different things depending on whether an Alt is in front or whether it is the Control or Shift keys in front. And on the Mac, by the way you do this, the Command key is sort of like the Control key, so everything I have down here for the Control or Shift keys really applies. And if there happens to be a shortcut that has the Alt key, then it's the same thing. Unfortunately on the Mac, this doesn't work quite as well, and there aren't quite as many features or options here. So that's how we enter shortcut keys. Now the next thing I want to go over is what to disable before you get started with Excel and what you should not do. Now, I've been teaching Excel now for close to 10 years as I record this, and I've seen the same mistakes come up again and again. We have thousands of comments and emails from students and professionals on the site who have run into trouble using Excel, and I've seen a few of these cases come up again and again. Of course, I can't address every single last possibility here, but here are some of the more common problems I've seen. First, you do not want to enable rather the scroll lock key on your keyboard. Now, some keyboards don't even have this. The one I'm looking at right now that I'm using doesn't even have this key anymore, but you want to disable this. It's just going to cause problems, and it's going to cause issues as you try to navigate around in Excel. If you have transition navigation keys, which are also there on some laptop and desktop and maybe even other keyboards, you want to disable those. When you're entering a numerical keyboard shortcut, so let's say, for example, that I want to press Alt-1. When I press the Alt key, you can see this area up here lights up, and we have these numbers here. So if I press Alt and release it and then press 1 now, that little disk up there means that I'll save the file. Well, when I do that, you do not want to use the number pad on the right side of the keyboard. Sometimes it'll work, but sometimes it won't work, and you really want to stick to using the line of number keys right above the main part of the keyboard on your computer. Unfortunately, I'm doing a screen recording, so I can't show you literally what my keyboard looks like, but that's the idea. So Alt and then 1, and you want to make sure you have that selected from the top part right above your normal keys. Again, sometimes the number pad may work, but it's a lot less convenient to actually reach in most cases, and you usually want to stay focused on the left side of the keyboard instead. Other things. Language bar. This is a big one that I've seen cause issues before. So if you have multiple versions, or multiple languages rather, installed in your version of Windows, I'm actually not sure how it works on the Mac, so this is mostly a Windows thing. But let me just show you an example of why this can be dangerous. So if you go into the control panel, clocks, language, region, this will be called something different depending on your version of Windows. And we go to regions and language here and go to change keyboards. So take a look at this. Take a look at how I have these settings set. Now, I actually only have English installed on this computer, but let's say I want to install another language, and okay, so let's say that I want to install Chinese on this computer for some reason. Okay, so I have this. Now, if I hit apply, notice how nothing has really happened here. And the main reason for that is because in the language bar here, I have set this to hidden. So I've set this to be hidden because I don't want this to interfere with anything. Now, if I had this and I set it to floating on desktop, for example, or docked in taskbar, that's a better example. The issue is that if I have this set like this, let me see if I can drag this over. So, okay, it looks like it's not dragging over, but essentially the issue is that if I have a language bar, which normally looks like this, if I have this popping up all over the place, sometimes this interferes with shortcuts that have Control or Shift or Alt in them. So generally you want to leave this disabled, or at the very least, at least check this off as hidden so it goes away and so you don't run into these problems. So that's normally what I like to do in this case. So just something to watch out for, something that I've seen cause a lot of issues in Excel in the past. Another issue is that on some laptops and desktops, the manufacturer may have set your function keys, so the F1, F2, F3, F4 keys at the top, to strange settings, and they may not actually work as normal function keys. So here's a quick test. If you press F1 right now, the Excel help menu should pop up. And it'll look a little bit different depending on which version you have and what operating system you're using, but some type of menu like this should pop up. Now, if you press the F1 key and this doesn't pop up, and you press other function keys and nothing happens or something strange happens, you have a problem. And what you need to do is look online and figure out how to reset the function keys so that they work like normal function keys. You may have to go into the computer's BIOS, which basically means that when you restart the computer, you press a special key and then you have to go in and change the default behavior. But make sure you do this correctly. I've seen this before on some HP laptops. They set it in a very strange way. So make sure that your function keys work like normal function keys. Other things. Make sure that you have strange plugins or add-ins or interfering macros disabled. So if you go to Alt-T-O for options and then you go over to add-ins over here, you can view all of your active add-ins and inactive add-ins. Now you can see that I have a lot of inactive add-ins here. Some of these I've created, like the discount UDF, user defined function. We'll get into that in the very last module here. But most of these are disabled by intention because I don't want necessarily to have all these. I do have some that are active for Adobe Acrobat for making PDFs and then for a screenshot capture utility, but these are very much intentional. The point is that if you see anything weird here or anything that you don't know what it's doing, you probably want to disable these. And you can do that by just, okay, actually I take that back. You cannot right click. This is just for displaying them. What you have to do is go to the Go menu down here for Manage Excel Add-ins. And then if you check these off, they will become available. If you uncheck them, they will not be available. So I really recommend leaving anything you don't need or that you're not using just unchecked. Otherwise, you may run into issues with them interfering with the built-in shortcuts in Excel and a whole bunch of other things. So I strongly recommend taking out anything that you're not actually using here. And then finally, languages other than English. So I've gotten a lot of questions on this one, and the short answer is that we are mostly focused on the English version of Excel and Windows here. Now, it's not to say that this course won't work if you're using another language. The issue is that occasionally there are weird exceptions with some of the keyboard shortcuts. Now, I've looked many times in the past to try to find a comprehensive list across different language versions, and I've never been able to find that. I don't know if one even exists or even if Microsoft has something like that, but there are a lot of weird quirks. So if possible, I would try to complete this course using an English version or at least a version that's as close as possible. The other factor is that people in finance, in the finance industry, everyone is using English for equity research reports and models and everything. So it's really to your advantage, if possible, to try to get a version in this language. Not the end of the world if you don't have this, but try to use this if possible, and it's going to make your life a whole lot easier. So that takes us to the end of what you should disable or what you should not do. Now, part 3 here, really part 3 and part 4. Part 4 I'm going to explain what to do on the Mac. Part 3, what should you change within Excel before getting started? There are a few settings that you want to set right away. So let's go to our friend, the Options menu again. So Alt-TO. In the Mac, by the way, this is Command comma, but we'll get to that actually on the next page for the Mac instructions. So Alt-TO. What should we change here? Well, the first thing I like to do is go to the Formulas tab, and I like to change a couple of things here. In Excel 2003, by the way, this will be under the Calculations tab. Excel 2003 will look much different, but I'm assuming that at this point, given that Excel 2003 is over 10 years old, you're probably not using it anymore, and it'll be even older by the time you watch this. So in newer versions of Excel, it'll be here, Workbook Calculations. This is the first thing I like to set. I normally like to set this to automatic accept data tables. The problem is that if you have this set to manual, when you enter formulas in Excel and calculations, they're not going to update automatically. So if the numbers change, they're not going to update. And you almost always want to have this set to automatic accept data tables. And then you also want to enable iterative calculations and have max iterations set to 100, maximum change set to 0.001. Both of these really relate to something called circular references that we'll get to much later on in the course. For now, the main point to keep in mind is that you want everything to update automatically to the greatest extent possible without slowing down Excel, and these are the optimal settings to get this to work. Now, what else should you change here? What else should you modify? So there are a couple things. One thing here is formula autocomplete. I actually don't recommend disabling this. I've seen some guides that suggest that you do disable it, and I have no idea why. This is a huge time-saving feature, just like autocomplete in Google or other search engines is a big time-saving feature. So I would leave this enabled. Error checking. If you're an advanced user, you can disable this and you can uncheck this. Some people do find it annoying to have Excel alert them to possible errors or warnings as they go through files, but if you're just learning or you are not an Excel pro quite yet, I would leave this enabled. There are a bunch of rules down here. You can play around with these if you want, but I would recommend strongly just leaving these as is. And then the final thing down here is that if you go to the Advanced tab, you'll see that there's one option here. After pressing Enter, Move Selection. I always prefer to leave this blank because after I enter something in a cell, I don't necessarily want to move in a certain direction. Now, if you're entering a whole bunch of data in a spreadsheet, you may want to set this so that every time you press Enter, you move down. Let's see what this looks like. So if I now enter the number 2 here, well, now I just move down this row. So we can see how it's different. Now, again, I prefer to actually leave this blank all the time, but it's really up to you and your work style, but this is how I usually leave them. There are a whole bunch of other settings here, but to be honest, I do not really change any of these all that much. I mostly leave these alone. There are a few exceptions, which we'll get to later in the course, but this is usually how I prefer to leave things. So those are a few settings to make sure that you have handled correctly before you even get started. And that really takes us to the end of the portion about the PC versions of Excel here. Now, for the Mac versions, as I say here, I'm kind of saying this in jest, but The bottom line is that yes, you can use the Mac versions of Excel if you really want to. And we do cover Mac shortcuts in this course because we got so many requests to do that over the years. But as you'll see, the Mac versions are greatly limited. You are not going to be able to accomplish as much. You're going to be more inefficient. You will be much slower because some of the built-in shortcuts just don't exist on the Mac. Some of the functions themselves don't even exist on the Mac. So ideally, you will install some kind of dual boot with Windows, or you'll use a program called Parallels, which essentially lets you run Windows programs at the same time that you're running Mac on your Mac. I would strongly recommend doing one of these because there are going to be major differences. And also, once you actually start working at a bank, or when you start doing that far in the future, you're going to have to relearn all these shortcuts because a lot of them are different on the PC and Mac. So bottom line, we will cover them. You will be able to still get a lot out of this course if you're using the Mac, but for the optimal experience in general, I recommend using the PC version because all banks and other finance firms use it, and because in general it's just a lot more robust than the Mac versions of Excel. And you can blame Microsoft for that. So if you want to be stubborn and use the Mac, let's go over and take a look at the Mac instructions. And by the way, to move over, here's your first Excel shortcut. It's Control Page Down on the PC and Control Function Down on the Mac. I think I have it written down here. Control Function Down, yes. So as you can tell, I'm recording this on a PC. Because of the way the screen recording software works, I cannot actually record this on a Mac and splice it together very easily. So basically, I'm going to attempt to show you everything through screenshots. If you get confused or you're not sure of something, just leave a comment below this video and I can clarify it or explain what to do. So what do you need to do on Mac? First thing is go to System Preferences on your computer and then select Keyboard here, or it might be called Keyboard and Mouse depending on which version of the Mac OS you're using. And this is basically just to ensure that keyboard shortcuts work at all. If you don't have this set right, then when you open Excel on the Mac, then keyboard shortcuts for the most part are not even really going to work. So go here and select Keyboard, what I have circled in red. And then step 2 is what you want to do is go over to the Keyboard Shortcuts tab right here, and then check off this one that's in red right here, Move Focus to the Menu Bar. So you always want to have that checked off because if you don't, then when you enter keyboard shortcuts, they will not be recognized properly by Excel. Now this menu may look a little bit different depending on which version of the Mac operating system you have, but that's always the basic idea. That you want to have keyboard and text input. It may be called something slightly different, but you want to go to keyboard shortcuts, and then make sure it's set like this. The other thing is you also want to check off all controls here. If you don't do this, then Excel, once again, it's not going to properly interpret everything that you do within Excel, and it may only attempt to apply what you're doing to text boxes and lists, but you want it to apply to every single part of the program. Then step number 3 is within Excel. So what you do is on the Mac, you can press Command and comma. Command is just the Apple key on the keyboard. It's the equivalent of the Control key on PCs. Press Command and then comma, and you can go into this window called Excel Preferences. What you want to do here is for calculation, this will look different, but it's the same idea as on the PC, where essentially you want to set workbook calculation to automatic accept data tables, and then enable iterative calculations and make sure everything is set like this. Now, if they happen to change this on the Mac, this could be listed under formulas in the future. I really have no idea, but it'll be under either formula or calculation. Error checking, again, you could disable this, you can enable this, it's up to you, but I recommend leaving it enabled unless you're a pro user. Autocomplete, some people recommend disabling this for anything except for formulas. You could do that as well. I personally don't have a strong preference, and I actually find it convenient to just leave this enabled in general. Step number 4. Okay, so these shortcuts now and these settings are more about making sure the control and arrow keys work properly. The control and arrow keys are some of the most important ones, and I'm pressing control up arrow, control down arrow repeatedly right now. Essentially, they let you jump between different regions of a worksheet in Excel, and if you don't have them working properly in your Mac version of Excel, you are going to face a lot of frustrations, and it's going to be very difficult for the program to work at all. So what you need to do here is go to System Preferences, and then you either go to Expose and Spaces or Keyboard. This varies depending on which operating system you're using. Instead of trying to classify everything here, I'll just say try one, and if it doesn't work there, go to the other and try that instead. And what you want to do is under Expose and Spaces, if your screen looks something like this, where you have an Expose tab and then a Spaces tab, you want to make sure that Enable Spaces over here is not checked. So if it's checked right now, you want to uncheck it and make sure it looks like this. And this will ensure, for the most part, that the control and arrow keys work properly. Now, if you do not have a screen that looks like this, or if expose in spaces is not even there, or if it doesn't show up properly, then what you want to do is go to keyboard, and then you want to go to the keyboard shortcuts tab, the same tab actually that we were at before when we went to keyboard and system preferences. And you want to go over to the left menu, the left-hand menu over here, click on mission control. And then for mission control right here, you see how we have these two areas for move left a space and move right a space? You want to uncheck both of these. And the issue with this is that these are going to interfere with the normal Excel shortcuts for moving left and right, with control keys especially. So you want to uncheck these. So in this screenshot, they're actually checked because I couldn't find a screenshot with them unchecked, but you want to go in and actually uncheck them for it to work correctly. And then the last thing here is also in the keyboard menu or the keyboard shortcuts menu. You want to go to Spotlight and then make sure that Show Spotlight search field is actually unchecked. And once again, this can sometimes interfere with the Control and Shift keys, Control Spacebar combinations, things like that. So you want to make sure that your screen looks like this. And again, there will be slight differences depending on the version of the Mac OS and what kind of computer, whether it's a laptop or desktop or tablet that you're using, but generally you want to make sure that it is set like this and it'll look something like this even if the specifics of the interface differ a little bit. So that's our overview of how to set up Excel properly on both the PC and Mac. You can tell that I'm definitely biased toward the PC here because it's nothing to do with the merits of a PC or Mac. It's just the fact that Microsoft hasn't invested as much into the Mac versions of Excel, and as a result, there are a lot of quirks and things that don't work quite as well. Nevertheless, you can still use it and you can still get a lot out of this course. You just have to make sure that it's set up right from the very start. So that's it for our overview of how to set up Excel properly and get started using this course. This checklist is available under this video if you click on Files and Resources, and you should definitely consult with it and always keep it around in case you happen to be working on a new machine that is set up differently or you're in an unfamiliar environment. You'll always have this on hand, and you can make sure that you have all the settings set correctly. Coming up in the next lesson, you'll be getting a tour of the actual Excel interface, and I'll be going through some of the key items such as the menu, the ribbon, the status bar at the bottom, and some of the other key points, and you'll gain some additional familiarity with how you enter data and how you manipulate Excel spreadsheets.